approach to wellness and health optimization, incorporating genomics, laboratory assessment, wearable devices, and more. My name is Mike Stone. I'll be your moderator for this event. We're really excited to have you here with us on International Digital Wellness Day for the Digital Wellness Day Summit. This is an opportunity to optimize your relationship with technology and your relationships with those around you. And we're going to approach this topic through digital flourishing, through a framework of digital flourishing. For those new to this term, refers to a mindful approach to digital technology use that supports thriving in different areas of life. So this will empower us to take advantage of the benefits of technology while avoiding associated harms. So let's go ahead and dive in. With me today, I have an amazing panel. So I'm just going to go around in the order that I see people appearing on my screen. So we've got Dr. Erin Donaldson, who's here with us. We have Chrys Jones, who's one of the health coaches with us here at Wild Health. We've got Nina Hersher, who you're probably used to seeing on the Digital Wellness Day already. And we've got Dr. Matt Dawson, who is the founder, co-founder and CEO of Wild Health. So we're going to jump right in and we're going to start with some questions we have. One thing I do want to call out is that if you have questions for the panel, go ahead and submit them in the Q&A box and we can keep an eye on that and therefore make sure we're seeing your questions and funneling them along. So we'll start off with Matt, just to give us an overall framework. What do you think, how would you describe digital health? What does digital health mean to you? Why is it important for us to self-quantify when it comes to our health?
Yeah, great question, Mike. I think we, in general, Wild Health have a philosophy of what gets measured gets managed. And while there's, I think, a lot of talk about intuitive eating or other kind of intuitive things, and while you don't need technology to sleep well, to eat well, to get outside and exercise, you don't for a lot of those things that are critically important. If you want to take that next step, if you really want to maximize health span, I think taking a digital and data-driven approach is just really helpful, just because, like I said, what gets measured gets managed. And the fact that we can measure millions of data points now, technology has become a really crucial tool in helping us maximize our health and health span.
Fantastic. I'm going to go to Erin. How have you seen technology transform the health of your patients?
So I love this question. I have had a lot of people come to me at kind of a pain point of frustration with their health. I work with a lot of people with chronic illness and autoimmune, work with all spectrums, but my biggest passion is disease reversal. And so a lot of people have tried a lot of the intuitive approaches that Matt was just talking about and getting some numbers back for some high, they're doing the work basically, and they're sometimes putting it in with great intention into the wrong bucket and getting some of those metrics back to more efficiently, use their efforts and energies and have a higher return on investment, whether it's shifting some supplements around, or maybe they were on a ketogenic diet and that's maybe the worst diet for their genetics. And we need to add more plants in or more animal proteins. We can use their genes and their data to really use their energy that they're already putting forth in an efficient manner. And we see we see the needle move pretty quickly for a lot of those patients in a lot of pain. So that's my favorite part.
I think it's probably be useful for us to take just a little bit of a step back and do a broad overview of the way that the folks on this panel approach health. Matt, maybe you can give us a quick overview of how, my experience as a patient in terms of how you would assess my health as a patient if I came to you, as opposed to how maybe my primary care physician would assess my health.
Yeah. So Mike, you and I and Erin being physicians in the system, we saw that it really didn't work. I think right now when you go and see a physician, you've got a problem, you have questions, and they base their answers on mainly statistics and epidemiology. So what works for most people. We have studies in medicine, but what those studies really show is what works for 60% or 70% or even 80%. But when you take a data-driven approach, you can get much better than that. And what a data-driven approach means to us is genomics-based precision medicine. So every patient that we see, we sequence their DNA. We look at hundreds of thousands of what are called single nucleotide polymorphisms. That DNA that's really critical. That's kind of like your human operating system. So we have to see that to be able to really treat you most effectively. DNA is not destiny, though. So we need a lot more data than just DNA. It's about 20% of your health outcomes, what you do, epigenetics, what you do with exercise, food, sleep, all of those play a massive role. So we need all the data on how you're performing now, what all the things that are going to make you feel and perform a certain way, your hormones, vitamins, minerals, all of that. So we also measure that. That also is not all of the story. There's so many things we can't measure, and we have to get those by using an ancient tool that medicine has kind of forgotten about, which is a conversation, actually talking to the patient. And that's data as well. When we say data-driven approach, that conversation is an incredible amount of data. And then when you have all of that, the conversation about not just what you eat, but where you eat, who you eat with, when, your religious beliefs, your mindfulness practice, with your DNA, with the blood test, then we have some really rich data that we can start to say, what's the right thing for you, not what's the right thing for most people. And you mentioned, you'd asked Erin how she's seen this kind of technology and bring that together, transform the lives of patients. That's why we're doing this. When we first started doing this, we saw multiple examples of how patients' health was transformed. My grandmother was one of the first patients I saw, and who had Alzheimer's, dementia. And she, on this program, this extreme data-driven approach, her cognitive score improved 25% over 3 months instead of getting worse. My mother was one of the next patients that I took care of because I was worried that she had the genes that my grandmother did. And sure enough, she did. She had an ApoE4 gene that increases your risk for Alzheimer's dementia by several times. We put her on the program. In 3 months, she lost 40 pounds, reversed her insulin resistance, and did all this. And it wasn't, like Erin was saying earlier, she was already trying to do it. She was trying to live healthy. She was doing everything she knew to do. She just didn't know enough. She didn't have all of that data about herself. And people want to be well. They want to be healthy. But there's so much noise out there about what they should be doing. And by getting the data about them, their DNA, their blood work, everything else, putting it all together, that's the data-driven approach. That's the tool that we want to arm patients with. People want to be well. They're smart. We just need to give them the tools and that data to be able to optimize their health.
Yeah, thanks for that, Matt. I mean, I think getting a sense of what we talk about when we talk about genomics-based precision medicine is really important, because it's a lot of big words kind of strung together. And I think one of the things that I initially found and still find so special about the work that's being done at Wild Health is the fact that you can do this deep dive, get a lot of quantification, a ton of data across genomics, labs, lifestyle, et cetera. But how does a patient actually go ahead and make the changes in their lives that they need to make these data-driven insights valuable and impactful to them? And to me, there's 3 docs on this call, and I'm going to say we're the least important part of that plan implementation. And I'm going to you with this, Chrys. Talk to us a little bit about why health coaching is such an important part of a patient's health journey. And then I've got some additional thoughts there for you about sort of data and patients and how we navigate that.
Yeah, so I think health coaching is integral to this process. Number one, because it builds bridges. As you said, there are only a few docs and there are tons of patients. You all don't have a lot of time to meet with them and to talk with them about how to specifically implement each change in the day-to-day life. Whereas as a health coach, I'm listening to them, I'm giving them a voice to hear, and they can message me and they can say, hey, what about this supplement? Or sleep was off last night. What do you think? And we can discuss that in real time for them. And it makes the process better. It makes them feel more connected. It gives them face-to-face time, but also it gives them a partner to help think through goals and interventions, because a lot of times people know what to do, but they may not know how, or life circumstances come up and they just need an objective ear that knows the science, knows the medicine, but also can just kind of look at their lifestyle and suggest or ask questions to bring change. And I think that's very important. And a lot of our patients really value that.
Absolutely. I think, I've said it a million times within our group and our culture and organization, that the health coaches are the heart of the organization. Because if there's one thing that's remains a tremendous issue in modern day healthcare, it's access to care, and it's just having someone to ask those questions to, and someone to help you make the changes that we're recommending that you make as a patient. So as a health coach, what do you think the benefits are and some of the risks of quantifying health data, whether that's maybe we'll save quantifying genomics for Erin or Matt, but Chrys, for let's say we've got somebody and we're quantifying we're using a wearable device to look at their sleep metrics, for example. Like what are the benefits there? What are the risks?
Yeah, so benefits, number one is we have data. We don't just want to make arbitrary coaching and health decisions. We want to see what's actually happening, again, in real time. So an Oura Ring, a Whoop, something like that, I can actually see how they slept last night, how their interventions are helping. If it's a CGM, how did the food affect them yesterday? So really just that ability to not only use data, but to see progress and to see change. But I think it also helps the clients to stay focused, because it's easy to take a day off. But if you've got a wearable that reminds you took a day off and your readiness took a hit, that wakes them up and says, oh, I need to get back on it. Risks, though, and I do think there are risks, and each patient is individual and unique, so we have to know them. But perfectionism, trying to get the perfect night of sleep, trying to get the perfect blood sugar can lead to orthosomnia, orthorexia, those kind of things, where now they're skipping meals because they don't eat the perfect food, or they can't sleep because their sleep data is messed up. And then also just too much, right? You can have too many devices, be looking at weight, sleep, CGM, and all of these things, and then add stress to their lives. And then they may have a mindfulness goal, or they may be a CEO and they don't need that extra stress. And then just over reliance. I think sometimes people can get so reliant on these devices that they think they can't live without them. And so I do think it's important to know the client so we can pick up on those signs.
Yeah. Anything to add there, Matt or Erin, on sort of staying true to being, living a natural lifestyle and getting back to our roots as human beings without becoming cyborgs walking around wearing a continuous glucose monitor and a Whoop band and an Oura Ring and a Leaf device and like 7 other different things at the same time?
I think it comes down to like your motivation and intention behind it, just like with a lot of changes we make in our lives, and knowing the patient, like Chrys was saying, I think is crucial. You can't get it all from numbers. Matt said that comment as well. Like, tech is beautiful to leverage and gives us so much data, but we have to know the people. There has to be trust and know what kind of their pain points are. And you can use these for positive reinforcement as well. And sometimes they can just be used, these wearables can be used for a week or a month as an experiment, and it doesn't have to be a lifestyle. And that's the right answer for some patients. I have patients where they would probably have never bought into meditation or sleep changes, et cetera, if they weren't seeing the positive results in their readiness scores or in their heart rate variability, that we're able to give them kind of that hook of like, what you're doing is working, keep it up. They're getting that short-term feedback, and there's positive results in that and positive feedback rather than just that restrictive mindset, which I think has been really, really cool to see in some people as well. It kind of takes the edge off the perfectionism, actually, for a lot of my patients.
Yeah. And Erin, you said motivation and intention, which I would agree with. And what I would add to that also is awareness, like people being aware of how the devices are affecting them. Chrys mentioned an Oura and a Whoop and sleep. And the point of those devices is to improve sleep. And I have had countless patients, a lot, who are wearing them and they're laying there at night stressing out about getting to sleep because their sleep score the next day is not going to be as good. And because of that, it takes them longer to get to sleep and their sleep is worse. And actually knowing if that's you, take the ring off, like quit wearing it. And these devices can cause stress and anxiety. And I mean, we have plenty of stress and anxiety in our life. So being aware of, is the device helping you? Is it giving you information that you're acting on? Or is it just something that is distracting you and causing stress and anxiety? And if it's the second, take it off and don't wear it. It's not benefiting you.
Yeah, it's great to hear those perspectives on sort of the benefits plus or minus the risks. I look at at wearable devices like this in, I think, a largely similar way generally, but I kind of stratify them out too. So like a continuous glucose monitor, for example, and we're talking about, for anybody who's unfamiliar, small device that attaches to your skin and just literally measures your serum blood glucose over time, and not in the context of treating someone with known diabetes, but in the context of getting tighter control over glucose and avoiding glucose variability. So those big spikes in glucose, because there's pretty convincing data now that even just normal spikes, or excuse me, lots of spikes in glucose in your, say, mid 30s can increase your risk of developing not only diabetes down the line, but cognitive decline, dementia, et cetera. So I look at something like a continuous glucose monitor as wear it for a couple of weeks or maybe a month or two, gain some insights into what type of foods really trigger your glucose just go sky high, and get a sense of what you can eat and tolerate, what behaviors might affect your glucose in terms of maybe walking after a meal, et cetera. But probably take a break and maybe come back to it in a year, or come back to it a little bit later if you feel like you need to reassess and see where you are. On the other hand, there's some wearables like an Oura Ring, for example, if you wanted to track your sleep, that you might use long term. But I think the idea of a device holiday is something that I recommend a lot of the time. And I'll do this in myself. I mean, I'm wearing an Oura Ring right now, no affiliation, no product placement, but I will stop wearing a ring for at least a couple of months, once a year, just to give myself a break and not constantly be looking at data. Also, I just don't know how you could manage to keep all of these devices charged if you were really walking around with all of these. It's like you need a separate brick next to your bed just to charge everything up. I'm going to take one question from the Q&A box. And I think anybody feel free to answer, but how often are you seeing patients using our service at Wild Health, but not fully following the game plan to keep them progressing?
I think that's a great question, Paul. And that's why Chrys is here and the health coaches are here. Making a plan is kind of easy once you have all the data and the technology to do that. But I think as the great philosopher Mike Tyson said, everybody has a plan until they get punched in the face. And so we give you a plan and say, this is the perfect diet for you. And then you're traveling and it's impossible for you to do that. That's when you need the health coach to come in. So the health coach is the one that really is going to help implementing that. So it's quite common that happens. And it's an iterative process. What we're practicing is precision medicine. It's not perfect medicine either. So it's constantly an iterative feedback cycle. So here's a plan. Here's what we're going to do. And even if it's the perfect plan, if it doesn't work for you and your lifestyle, then it's not the perfect plan. We need a different plan. So that's important to keep in mind too. It's not a failure of the patient if they don't stick to this plan. It means we need a different plan that they can stick to in their life.
I would love to chime in on that too. So we've been talking a lot today about this idea of a communication charter, and this can be for households or for workplaces or for families. And a lot of people are having a hard time with habit change. And so one of the things that we're seeing is that if you ask someone, hey, do you want to opt into text? Do you want to opt into emails? And give them that moment of pause to say, hey, what is the best way for us to keep in touch with you? And sometimes you can customize this and sometimes you can't. Sometimes it's an evolving process. Meeting that person where they are can also result in seeing more kind of movement because they are signing up for that level of support, or that level of communication. And as we look at this kind of idea of quantified self in the context of digital flourishing, we are looking at how we can use all of this data to optimize, behavior change from that information. And so interacting with technology, like to bring those changes in behavior about with a person, with an accountability partner, is such a powerful process. And there is so much to understand that I think having a health coach, having someone you can work with to break it down, to be that kind of knowledge translation agent, is just immensely impactful.
Yeah, and I would just jump in and say to that question. We do see sometimes people go on vacation, people have deaths in the family, or sometimes they just take a break from all of the interventions and goals just because they want to live life. And my job as a health coach is to stay in touch with them. So you talk about technology. I don't want to bombard them daily or weekly unless they want that. But I do want to stay in touch and just say, hey, how are you doing? How are you feeling? I noticed your sleep data was a little off last night, and then have that conversation. And a lot of times I'll say, what have you done well? And then how are you struggling, so that I can hear them tell me why they're struggling, how they're struggling. And a lot of times you'll hear what you just described. There's so much going on in life that I just didn't have time to focus on the supplements or the diet. And then we try to work with that lifestyle and get them back on track.
Yeah, and it's not I think there's a lot of need to frame expectation around when you start monitoring the number of variables, the number of interventions that we talk about with our patients. We had I can't give attribution because I don't remember her name exactly, but we had a guest speaker a few months back who's a registered dietitian and a nutritional expert, and had this great analogy of if you forget to, how many people brush their teeth every night? And everybody raises their hands and say, yeah, I brush my teeth every night. And well, how many people have ever forgotten to brush their teeth before they go to bed? And everybody raises their hand and says, yeah, there's been a time where I've forgotten to brush my teeth. And then what do you do the next day? And everybody goes, well, I just go back to brushing my teeth. And yet you look at the way people look at fitness or nutrition, and if somebody kind of goes off the rails and eats something that isn't maybe the best for them, or forgets, gets a little bit tired and unmotivated and doesn't work out, there's a lot of overcorrective behavior that we see, to your point earlier, Chrys, about orthorexia and ortho exercise, where, I'm going to make up for the fact that I had a pizza and a pint of ice cream by myself, by, not eating for 3 days. And it's just about getting people to accept that there's a lot of data coming in, but it's okay. You're going to do your best every day, and you'll just do your best tomorrow, because otherwise it can seem really overwhelming. Right. I was going to ask Erin, because I do think this idea of diving deep into, a digital picture and a digital identity of our patients is, we've seen the value in terms of patient outcomes. We know that this works, but what do you think helps preserve human connections with our patients in this digital world where we're interacting via telemedicine and we're getting genomic, all this data? What's the best way to preserve that human connection, that doctor-patient relationship?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. I loved, more from the data perspective. I love what Matt hit on earlier, that like patients are not statistics. And I think in that way, data can actually help preserve that individuality and that humanity, because most of the data we have, it's a radical change for how we look at nutritional data, especially. Almost all the data we have previously is on a population level, which doesn't make anyone feel special and really doesn't apply to any one person in particular. It doesn't matter if you're not that person in the statistic, right? So getting individual data, I think, can really hit home for people and can feel like emotional for them when they start seeing changes. So I think in and of itself, the tech can help preserve that if used in the right way, like we've kind of stressed for the last few minutes. But also just not forgetting humanity. Like, you're looking at all these numbers and you're on a screen and it's easy to get wrapped up in that. But like, it's also a really cool thing to ask about, what your patient's day has been like, or if you pick up on an emotional cue, explore that if that's the right thing to do. I know usually when my patients have their kids or grandkids and know what's going on in their lives in large strokes to the best that I can. And I know the health coaches do a lot of that. And I think if you don't have that trust when you're talking about such vulnerable subjects as changing habits and changing health outcomes and these fears that come along with those things, like, you're not going to see sustainable change. You're going to see that yo-yo that you talked about, that overcorrection of behavior, and then it's not going to be sustainable. So I think just don't forget to preserve the real human connection and ask those questions that are not necessarily data points that you can see on a lab result.
I think that's such a great point, even in relation to looking at it through a kind of hybrid lens. Like, I do exercise classes online with friends, and we'll do them. And then afterwards we'll call each other and say, how was that for you? And just talk about it even live for 2 minutes can make a big difference. And I think that is the differentiator for me, at least, is looking at quantified self in the context of tech enabled health with elements of human connection, with elements of how we can break it down for each other, make sure we're integrating, make sure we're embodying. And that's what I'm really loving about all of these conversations today.
So we should, after the webinar, I should just call you.
Definitely.
Okay, awesome. Now, it's all kidding aside, it's our typical initial consultation with a patient with their physician and their health coach, we'll be doing a lot of screen sharing. And I've made a real point recently that if I'm not talking about a specific number or a specific genetic polymorphism or something else that I need, like a graph or a visual display, to constantly be turning off the screen sharing during those meetings, because there's something about a group of people looking at a screen versus even like this feels so much more connectable than if you're sharing the experience of viewing a document together. So those little things I think can go a really long way, whether it's a personal connection afterwards or it's just taking a break from the world of screen sharing. I think that can have an impact as well. Hey, I'm going to give this question from the Q&A box to you, Chrys. How do you know when it's time to lean in and when it's time to step away from all the data?
That's a tough one. And it really, again, takes building a relationship. So if a client says, my sleep's been bad, or it tells me every day I have 5 hours of sleep, or my diet's messed up, my glucose keeps doing this. And every time they say something, it's not how they feel, it's what the data tells them. Sometimes I'll just ask them, how are you feeling though? Like when you sleep 5.5 hours, according to your ring or your strap, how do you actually feel? And I've had this conversation before where I've told someone, he's like, I feel horrible. Or like every time I put the ring on, I can't sleep. And I'll just say, hey, take it off for 2 weeks. And let's see what happens. Take off your CGM, or when it runs out, don't put one back on, see how your diet goes. And it really is based off conversation, but a lot of times you can pick up signs. Another one that I noticed will be constant negative language. So every time I do this bad thing, my data messes up. And when I eat this bad food, and so I'll ask them, well, what made that thing bad, or what made that food so immoral? And they'll say it's not immoral, it's just bad. And then I'll start to talk to them about the language. And if the device is what's causing this thing to seem bad, but you like it, or it's a part of your lifestyle, maybe dial back away from that tech for a little bit so you can recenter and ask yourself, A, does this need to be a part of your life? And B, do you think this is morally bad? Because again, you can listen and hear it, but if you don't listen, you won't hear it. You'll just keep going with the data. So it takes a lot of conversation to pull that out of people.
Yeah, I think that it's several of the things you said right there just reinforced to me the tremendous amount of skill and the different skill set that health coaches bring to these interactions with patients. And whether it's, gaining insights about motivation, or it's motivational interviewing, or it's, behavioral change, these little things about the language that's used go a long way to giving us clues at how to best work with someone and how to best work with that person with regards to sharing data, making data visible, and basing plans off of that data. Follow-up question there. And Matt, you probably know more about the tech goodies out there than anyone I know. What are some of your favorite types of tech-enabled health or wearables?
Yeah, sure. And just to follow up on the point that Chrys is making, one thing I would say is that you are not your numbers, you're not your data. The data is there for you and to serve you. So I think the time to lean in is when it's actually helping you make decisions and improving your life. And the time to lean out is when it's causing you problems. Like the data is to serve you, you're not there for the data. So I think that's how I would kind of make that decision. As far as what devices I think are the most helpful that I've seen in patients. We've already mentioned a few of them. I have them on an Oura Ring for sleep, the Whoop for exercise tracking and sleep. Just sleep is just such a critical part. I don't know if there's really anything more important for your health to optimize. So those are pretty important. What those allow us to do also is not just track, but I think Chrys kind of alluded to it, but do these N of 1 experiments. You've probably heard podcasts or read things, and there's 1,000 interventions that may help your sleep. We can get some clues by your DNA and talking to you about what interventions may help, but we don't want to guess. Like, we want to try one, wear the ring for a week, see what works. And then you're using this as a tool to do those experiments and quantify yourself to see how to optimize yourself. So it's a tool to help you do that. So anything that allows you to do that is what I would consider a great device. So Mike mentioned the CGM. The CGM is what you'll do to run those experiments on what food is going to impact you the best or the worst. And then the last one I'll name that we haven't named, just to give you a new one, is a heart rate variability monitor. So there's a couple that are out and coming out. So one is called a Leaf device. It's a little thing that you patch right on your chest, and it measures your heart rate variability constantly. And heart rate variability, or HRV, is one of the best markers we have for stress. So to actually quantify your stress. And what this device does is it's measuring your HRV constantly. And if it goes below a certain place, you're really stressed, and it alerts you. And it walks you through how to do some deep breaths in and out, and you can watch your HRV come back up. And what this does is it teaches you two things. One, it teaches you what is really stressing you out. Does your HRV drop every time you're doing email? Okay, that's a trigger. Maybe email is something that you need to block into certain periods of time. Does it go down when you're around certain people? That's telling you something as well. So it's giving you information about what stresses you out. It also teaches you how to improve that and to recognize it on your own. After wearing that device for a while, you may notice that, every time it drops and I get an alert, I actually felt something in my stomach before that. Something wasn't right. And then you start to get better at the intuitive part and realizing when you're stressed out, when you need to take some deep breaths. So CGM, Oura Ring, Whoop, the Leaf device, those are the ones that I think are really helpful because they give you specific information and allow you to learn about yourself and take better care of yourself when you don't have them later as well.
Fantastic. I've got nothing to add there. One other question I want to make sure we get to. And I think, sorry, Matt, you were just chatting, but I'm gonna feed this one back to you. And oh, Erin, you raised a hand. Let's do that first.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that sometimes wearables can certainly aid in the actionable portion too. Like, I have an Apollo device, for instance, and it looks similar to a Whoop. You wear it on your wrist, but it uses vibration technology. And I wouldn't say I use it on a daily basis by any means, but there's some pretty cool data that it really helps get into that calmer parasympathetic nervous system state. And if it's been a particularly stressful time and I'm trying to aid my body in unwinding for the evening, or there can be other ways to utilize it. It's pretty neat to be able to use these to leverage, what you're wanting to do with your body as well from an actionable standpoint.
And to that point, Erin, I think just as we eat different foods in different seasons, and just as we, might use a health coach more in certain chapters that are harder for us, I think it's completely natural and normal that we would go to different wearables when we're needing different things. And so I think also normalizing and giving ourselves the permission to introspect and say, hey, what do I need right now? Like, I just got back from flying to Saudi Arabia, one of the longest flights I had ever been on. And I decided to bring my Oura Ring because I really wanted to measure and see how I was doing with sleep and recovery. And so I think there are definitely times when I put it on because I want to learn more. And then times when I take it off and I say, okay, can I just close my eyes and see how I'm feeling? And then I'll check what Oura says. And often that's actually pretty close, but I have to condition myself in different chapters to learn through those tools. So I think just like any good kind of coach or any good teacher wants to give you the tools to fly on your own, we can think about wearables in the same way. The goal might not be to wear it forever. The goal might be to take what we want to learn from it and then maybe put it in the corner for a few months before coming back to it.
That's a great point. I before I get to the question, I'm going to give you Matt and Erin. Feel free to answer this one too. The one other thing I'd say from a wearable, the health tech standpoint that we haven't talked that much about is meditation and mindfulness. And I don't need to go through a list of all of the guided meditation apps out there. There's a million of them, and there are many of them that I like. But one really cool, interesting device is the Muse device, which actually gives you real-time feedback as to what's going on a very sort of simple EEG level in your mind while you're meditating or doing mindfulness practice. And I've definitely had clients and patients who feel like this has really helped them kind of tap into meditation, because they're a very common barrier is, am I doing this right? That can really discourage people from getting into a mindfulness practice, and just having some feedback in real time to know that things are, you're okay. It has been really useful for folks. And with that, the actual question. So we do genomics analysis. You talked about this, Matt. What are some of the most valuable insights you've seen from looking at someone's DNA? And what are the risks of looking at genomics?
Yeah, so maybe I'll jump into the risks, because I think the natural thing is to give you thousands of examples of really actionable things that made a big impact, and I gave a few before, but I think there are a lot of risks, and I don't think that's what people would necessarily expect me to say when we're a genomics-based precision medicine company. But I think the risks are in the interpretation and the translation. And I think as a physician, our job is to interpret, translate, and educate. That's it. And once we've done that, then it's up to the patient to take the actions and get better. So I already kind of made the point that DNA is not destiny. So in the example I gave of my mother, who had this gene that makes her much higher risk of Alzheimer's, like if I just give her that information, that could be very defeating. She could feel like that's her destiny, and that's not the case. It's motivating and helps us be able to figure out how to prevent it. So the interpretation of that, saying, this is not what's going to happen to you, this is a risk factor, and these are the things we're going to do to fix it. Also, for myself, I'll use myself as an example. When it comes to exercise, there's really great data on if you match someone's exercise to what they're more predisposed to respond well to, strength or endurance, they're going to have better outcomes. There's great studies on athletes showing they make faster improvements if you base their training on their genomics. Well, for me, I have a really strong proclivity towards endurance. So I could make the mistake of just doing endurance work, whereas I know just physiology and just sports science as someone over 40 years old, I'm losing 1% of muscle mass every year, and strength training is really critical for me. So if I didn't know to interpret that as, okay, I'm going to get a little extra benefit if I have limited time doing endurance maybe, but strength is really important. If I miss that translational part, that could be damaging as well. And then the last part of that is understanding that the genomics is a piece of the puzzle. Again, DNA is not destiny. It's not the whole picture. It's a piece of the puzzle. Earlier I said we are not our data. We're also not a collection of organ systems, which I think is a mistake that medicine makes. We're a whole person. The DNA is part of it. So taking that in the context. So an example of that, because I think examples are critically important. If we see someone has a VDR SNP, that means they're predisposed to having lower levels of vitamin D. But if that person is a landscaper in Florida out in the sun all the time, their vitamin D level may be completely fine. So you can't look at just that genetics. It's what is their vitamin D level on their blood work, and what is their activity levels, and where are they? It's different if they're in the summer in Florida versus in the winter in Alaska. So it has to be taken as a small piece of the puzzle. It's a critical piece, but it's just a piece of the puzzle. So I think those are the risks with genomics. It's the interpretation, the translation, and understanding it's a small piece of the puzzle. It's not the entire picture.
Chrys, you've got your hands up.
Yeah, I just wanted to share, even within health coaching, it's a lot of fun to have DNA, because sometimes clients have heard a podcast or they've learned something and they want to know, like, will this work for me? And one way is to just experiment, have no data, and they've probably been doing that for a few years, but then to say, here's your genetics and here's the impact on your labs. Let's see if we can follow your genes and make some change and see what happens. And it's really cool, because a lot of times people will say, well, I kind of knew this about myself, but I heard this and I went against what I thought. and the DNA kind of shows them maybe a direction, and then the labs and the doctor visit help confirm that direction. So it makes it helpful for me as a coach to have something to lean on with the DNA. But again, it's not everything. And for some people, they contradict the DNA, or their, epigenetics show that they don't have to follow that path. But it's neat when they do follow the path and it works out to benefit their health.
Yeah, and I think to piggyback on that, Chrys, you said it's not everything. There's also so much we don't know. I think right now it's so fun. We know more than we've ever known, but I think in 5 years, we'll look back now and think, wow, look how little we knew. So when we see a genetic marker or genomics and we think that we're going to have this impact by doing this, it usually works, but it doesn't always, because there may be all these other genes we've yet to discover the effects, and we're not even looking at those. So humility is a critically important part of precision medicine. It may be the best medicine we can do right now, but it's nowhere close to being perfect medicine or giving us all the answers.
And I'm really looking forward to seeing that improve over time and see that grow, because even now, if I'm looking at like a 40-page health report that says, hey, here's how you can be the healthiest you, why wouldn't everyone want to do that? Because if you had that from an even younger age, you were using these tools, you had all that information, even growing up, it's like this kind of portal into how to be your healthiest future self. And there are so many things in life that happen to us, right, that are just out of our control, but there is a lot that we can control. And so I mean that in the most empowering way possible, as we do look at this intersection of tech-enabled health and digital wellness, basically meaning what is the optimum state of health and well-being that we can all achieve using technology and interacting with each other in the wisdom that comes from all of the people here today with this rich experience.
I love what you just said, Nina, and I feel like we've been touching on it a lot, the point of empowerment of our patients. And I feel like the general healthcare system, at least as I learned it in medical school, was very much one of not of an empowering state as a general rule, like a lot of putting labels on pathology for patients and disease. Even the term diabetes, right? We say to patients, you are a diabetic, as if it's part of their identity as a human being. And it's really disheartening. I can't tell you how many patients I've had come to us and say, I just thought this was forever. I thought this was a part of who I was. And we know very well that we can reverse these things with lifestyle changes. And I think it's important. I think it's honestly our duty as providers to, when we use genetics, to make sure we're using that lens for patients and reminding them that they have, to such a huge degree, control over their outcome, and really empowering them to learn the best tools of how to do that. But just can't echo enough what you just said and what Matt just said about it really not being their destiny. And it's really not as deterministic as we used to think genetics were.
Yeah, I don't think I even really heard much about reversing diabetes until the last 5 or 10 years. Right. I mean, that just wasn't something you did. It was a commitment that you were going to be on medication. You were going to be, taking increasing doses of insulin for the rest of your life and have all of the downsides that come with long-term diabetes and insulin use. So I think, to me, one of the most exciting things about quantifying patients' health data is recognizing these opportunities for what are going to be the high value wins, where we really want to target our interventions. What are the biggest issues that are going on with their health right now? Sometimes it's in alignment with what they're subjectively seeing as the biggest issues, and sometimes it's stuff that they had no idea about. And being able to say, hey, let's tackle this, and then once we take care of that, let's tackle this, and go sort of stepwise to make it more digestible for patients, and to really, I don't think I get a better feeling out of providing care this way than saying, hey, that medication you're on, you don't need to take it anymore. And it's always a really, it's empowering for the patient, and it's just gratifying and really rewarding as a physician. I think we're winding down on time. So unless I see any additional questions, I'm just going to check the QA box real quick. Chrys, I need to give you a shout out. I don't know if you can see the QA box, but somebody wishes they could have you as their health coach. Language, phrasing, so powerful, beautiful approach. So I also wish I could have you as my health coach, Chrys. Any closing words from you, Nina, or from anybody else on the panel?
I think you've summed it up really beautiful, Mike, and I appreciate the Wild Health team being here today as some of the leaders in quantified self and really being the most powerful knowledge translation agents that I've seen in this realm of work. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. It's so kind. Well, thanks for having us, and thanks to everybody from the team for joining. And I hope you guys have a great rest of the day.